All right, welcome to the Sweet Science of Fighting podcast. Today we have Vern Gambetta. Welcome, Vern.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Looking forward to talking about this, maybe a little bit outside my comfort zone.
Now, this will be a good podcast. So obviously, we met, I don't know, maybe 5 or so years back now at your game conference. It was probably one of the more influential conferences. In fact, it's actually pretty much one of the only ones I've been to. I don't really want to go to any others now with that one because that was so good. But do you want to maybe provide a brief background about yourself and we'll jump into some of the topics today?
Yeah. Well, I've been starting my 54th year of coaching. My background as an athlete, I played college football. I was an offensive lineman, not very offensive, and then I took up decathlon after college because I wanted to be a track coach, and that was a means of learning events. And I at the same time I was coaching, I competed in decathlon. I played football and went to Fresno State College, and then started my coaching career in Santa Barbara, California, coaching junior high school, middle school, and then went to Stanford University for my master's and coached that year. There, I went back, coached at Santa Barbara High School, and then coached women's track and cross country at Cal Berkeley for 5 years, and then ventured out, in a sense, into the private sector, just coaching individual athletes leading into the 1984 Olympic Games, decathletes, heptathletes, and distance runners, and then ventured into pro sports. Went to work for a guy who had a contract with the White Sox and the Bulls, worked for him for 2 years, and then was director of conditioning for the White Sox for 9 years. Had no interest in baseball, no background in baseball, but they basically paid for the equivalent, I think the equivalent of my PhD. I had a budget, I had authority, I learned a lot. I think we did a lot of innovative things that are recognized as such now. And then went into pro soccer, working with pro soccer, was the conditioning coach for the worst conditioned World Cup team ever, the U.S. team in 1998. You cannot prepare for the World Cup with 10 minutes a day. And my big lesson I'll share with you then is you can never compete above your level of physical preparation. And that's a simple concept. You can wish and hope and say, I have great athletes, but it won't work. And then did that. And then kind of from there, started GATE in 2007, which brought a lot of things together. Done some work in rugby, both codes, league and union. And then a little bit with sevens, cricket, you name it. And now we also have gained swimming, which we started 20 years ago, but it's really taken off. And we have 12 of the top 20 teams in the U.S. use the GAIN system. And we had a silver medal. Well, we had three medalists in the last Olympic Games, and about 25% of the U.S. Olympic team, men and women. And so that's, pun intended, I am very immersed in swimming right now. Dryland coaching anywhere from 5 or 6 sessions a week there. So it's been a long journey. It's been a fun journey across a lot of sports. And my thing is, as you know, James, is to make connections between sports. And there's a lot more similarities than there are differences. So that's what's been neat to see. So
and that's why it's awesome bringing you on here, even though not from a combat sports background. Everything applies to everything, and sports principles are the same, regardless of the sport. And I think with your coaching experience too, you've coached longer than many of us have been alive, and and you've been very vocal about a few different topics as well. But one of the topics I wanted to jump into, it's one I think most athletes, even I struggle with it, is the idea of moving away from a 7-day microcycle. And I know you've talked a lot about, hey, it doesn't have to be Monday to Sunday, a 7-day cycle of training. Right. You can do 10-day, 14-day, 21-day, even microcycles. Do you want to maybe just go a little bit into your philosophy around that?
Yeah, I call it, and it's the Judeo-Christian periodization model. The big guy worked for 6 days and rested on the seventh, and and that was great at creation. But now with also we don't. I'm a big believer in the 24-hour athlete concept, and so if you can train, right now we have our international group here training 4 or 5 hours a day, some days a week. But what about the other 19 hours? And so you got to look at, and I started thinking about this when I was coaching at Cal Berkeley, and we'd have Sunday as our day off, and Monday was our hard day, and sometimes our hard day, our big emphasis day, and it was just terrible. They came off a complete rest. Monday was a high stress day. It was a high stress day for me. All the assignments either are due on Monday or they're getting the assignments, and kids would come to the track just fried. And I go, look, we can do this better. So that's when I came up with the idea of a 14-day microcycle. It actually ended up making Monday an active rest day. So, it's where you start the training. And if you're not comfortable with that, and this goes back to classical periodization, there's always a period of preparation within a microcycle, a period of adaptation, and a period of application. And with 10 or 14 days, it works out perfect. You have 3 or 4 days of preparation, a little more general work. Then you make the transition to raising intensity, and then you lower volume and raise intensity and get more specific. So what it solves, it creates, if you can work it around your lifestyle and your life work, I think that's first thing. And then the biggest thing is it cures the density problem. You look at 7 days, and I don't know how you feel about this, James, or the listeners, but think about it. I think, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, I've got to do that. There's a lot of boxes we have to tick, not just to tick boxes, but that are important to get adaptation. And it takes away from that. You just go, it's like a big sigh of relief. Like, wait a minute, I don't have, and I set things up within that as major emphasis and minor emphasis. So if it's major emphasis, it's got to show up more often in that microcycle. If it's minor emphasis, I know I'm always touching on it, in that. And so doing it, and you mentioned even 21 days. I sometimes in a real general phase, way far away from competition, we use a 21 day, but I would rather, I think of a mesocycle or a block, whatever you want to call it. I think of it as 3 14-day microcycles, like that. And when I'm not competing, the first 14 days are more preparation, the middle ones are more adaptation, and then it's application, And that's about, in terms of the whole planning thing, that's about as long. I have general objectives for 6 months from now, but that 6 weeks is really zeroed in, And I think if people are afraid to try it, I think at times because the first 14 or 28 days, it's a little uncomfortable because you're moving things around. We have traditionally Saturday's a hard day. Saturday probably would be a hard day. And then people, for what religious reasons or whatever, in some countries, they shut down on Sunday, But look at what your highest stress day is outside of your training too, and make that an active rest or a rest day. And I usually there's a couple of active rest days in there, too. So it was a attempt at a solution, Yeah.
Yeah, I really like the concept. I know what you mean about almost like the anxiety of trying to fit everything in for 7 days, because you're going, okay, I need to do my strength work 2 or 3 days, or I need to do this extra conditioning. But then you've also got how many days of technical training on top, and then whatever else you have in your life. And you go, okay, well, if I miss this session, I miss it within this 7 days or this microcycle. But if you extend it out to that 14 days, you can almost spread things out to a point where you have the time.
It gets a little blown out of proportion. But this is not a good example, but this is just some notes. I start my planning with notes. I'm helping a former pro football player that I work with. He's a high school coach here 1 day a week. And I just write notes, and that's where it starts. Now the rubber's got to meet the road. I have an hour, and I have to also be careful that I don't try to cram everything into the hour, right? So, and so it's a common dilemma that we face. that particularly when people aren't full-time professional athletes. And then the other vein, if they're full-time professional athletes, they try to do too much too often. It's a little bit backwards that way. Yeah.
For sure. But how would you employ something like this? More of a thought experiment here, but for most people, they have like it'll be a 7-day microcycle because perhaps the technical training they do is on certain times of the day, certain days of the week. So, for example, every Saturday might be a hard session, and every Wednesday might be a hard session. So you're almost locked into the 7-day mindset within the technical training. How do you work everything else around that to be like, okay, I'm thinking broader in a 10 or 14-day cycle?
Well, first of all, if those are your benchmarks. That's what you build your 14 days around. Okay, so when are you going to start your 14 days? So if it's Wednesday, Saturday, chances are I'm going to have Monday my rest day, and Sunday is going to be. And if you're talking about, I've not been a long time, but done some stuff with wrestling and that, and Nick Garcia, who is now doing a lot of Brazilian jiu-jitsu and that, and so you've had a hard technical session, you've had a lot of grappling, a lot of stuff on Saturday, then Sunday should probably be more of an aerobic day. And I don't like to label it necessarily recovery, but it could be it can be more aerobic, lower intensity, yoga type of stuff. Monday off, then Tuesday you're starting to build up into Wednesday, and then you could theoretically have an active rest day on Friday before your Saturday. If those technical sessions are going to determine how good you're going to be, then everything has to be focused on those, and everything else supports those. Does that make sense?
Yep. No, that makes complete sense as well. And I think it's more of a planning area where people get confused or fall into that grinding mentality of, hey, hard session Wednesday, but it's going to also be hard sessions on Tuesday and Thursday and Friday because they need to feel like they're doing work, to feel like they're making progress, but fall into that trap of just beating themselves into the dirt.
And it's easy to do that, I've done that as an athlete. I checked my blog. We all have. I put my training from when I was doing decathlon, and I looked at it, and I showed it to my wife. I was married at the time, and I said, "How did you stay married to me?" And she said, "I don't know. We've been married 50 years. It's probably." But I look at that and I go, "Did I get better?" Yeah, because I'd never done it before, but I was tired all the time. And the quality, the quality was sacrificed. Quality and intensity are not the same. Quality is a measure of perfect, and intensity is a measure of 100%. But so, when you go into those sessions, and I've been around, martial arts and combat sports enough that those have to be to fine tune your technique. You can't be really tired. You're going to be tired at the end of a match, but that's different. That's later. You're learning moves, things like that. So, and the other thing, James, that I think is really important, and I don't mean to say that the 10 or 14-day microcycle will, bring world peace or cure cancer or something like that, but what it does is it forces you to take a less is more approach. So, and understand the connection between workouts. So we tend to look at, today was a great workout. It was a great workout. I dug deep. My adrenals are gone. I come back tomorrow. Shit, pardon my French. Instead of saying, okay, how do I sequence stuff so that I can get the optimum out of the most important workouts and they fit together? So I think of it as one big workout broken into segments.
Yeah, that's an awesome way of looking at it too. And you mentioned about quality of practice. I don't know if it was you. It must have been from you and potentially Gain about perfect practice, and essentially not. People will say perfect practice well, I can't remember the saying, whatever it is, about perfect practice being perfect, but you want imperfect practice because you want to make those mistakes and you want to be able to essentially self-organize and self-learn, essentially. Do you want to maybe dive a little bit into that?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, it's in vogue now, sort of differential learning, implicit learning versus explicit learning, learning through exploration and that. And I think that, and again, I'm an old guy talking here, that came up in the era of very explicit learning, step 1, step 2. And I know that exclusively that created robots. That didn't work. The great athletes stayed great, and the average athletes didn't thrive on that. So creating opportunities for mistakes and, testing the envelope and recognizing that mistakes are learning opportunities and evaluating. And I think a lot of this, James, really comes to your mental your mindset going into the training session, so that you have clear objectives of what you're trying to achieve. And then you look at what happened, then you debrief. It can be just in the shower. It doesn't have to be a formal thing. I mean, we do a formal debrief once a week with our high-level swimmers and with the athletes. But, just like a little checklist and say, okay, now I have this particular move or this particular thing. I'm struggling with it. How do I work on that now? And I got pinned 5 times in a row, the sixth time you might be better. And I think we tend to look at things in a finality. So, perfect practice is I think that was something that we were hammered in, sort of this Protestant work ethic. It's got to be perfect. It's got to be perfect, and even competition. The perfect competition has never happened yet, so it's learning opportunities is the way I look at it, chances to learn.
Yeah. I think it was also drilled into a lot of people in sports where when you make mistakes, you get punished by the coach doing push-ups or whatever else. And then it kind of exacerbated from there because obviously then it had to be perfect. You can't make mistakes. And obviously, as you mentioned, you start getting into that robot mentality.
I have to say, I did, back when I was working with the Bulls, we trained at this we had our area and it was a public, really fancy health club. And this guy, I noticed he was watching and he came up and talked to me. And he was a judo player, a musician, really accomplished musician. And he asked me if I'd work with him some. And, so I said, yeah. I says, what do you charge? I said, nothing. I said, I want to learn about, you tell me, I want to learn what you're doing. I'll learn from you. And that's one of the things that he told me. So he was in Korea, I think. And the sense I would, if he made a mistake, he had a 2x4 and he'd hit him with a 2x4.
It sounds like Cobra Kai.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm thinking, oh man, I don't know about that.
Real life Cobra Kai. That's funny.
Yeah.
That perfect practice thing. I think we all fall into that mindset too. Like even like, for example, wrestling or jiu-jitsu, you come on the mats and you're rolling with partners and you're often looking to almost win the role, get into positions you're comfortable with versus exploring some of maybe the newer things and things you're worse at and losing a lot just to figure it out yourself, Yeah. And I wanted to go a little bit into energy systems because I think we have a couple of, I guess we could say a couple of schools of thought around. I mean, zone 2 stuff is just all over the bloody internet now, and everyone's obsessed over zone 2. But outside of that, you've got a pure physiological approach where you're looking at, okay, whatever I'm doing, I'm stimulating physiological adaptations to target specific energy systems versus maybe a work or power output kind of mechanical model, I guess you could say, where it's more about, can I sustain or repeat these efforts at this intensity for these times with these rests and things like that. And obviously these can be intertwined together in a conditioning philosophy, but I know you've been very vocal around the idea of the interplay between energy systems and I guess not isolating them. Do you want to maybe dive a little bit into that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just finished listening on my walk this morning to, I should know the name, but I don't. He's the coach of the he's an engineer who's the coach of the two Norwegian triathletes that are basically dominating the world. It's fascinating because an engineer has a mindset of, and they do all this monitoring, but at the end of the day, it comes down to really getting to know the people. And he's got two of them; they're friends. But one of the things, as you were asking the question, just made me think about this. First of all, because I was just writing, I'm writing a blog post for next week about this. First of all, you cannot train a energy system. You cannot train aerobic. You can't train anaerobic lactate. You can't train. All of them are working all the time. As we're talking right now, our lactate system is activated. It's almost immeasurable, but it's activated. And I think this idea that we think that we can isolate out and train an energy system, and in a match that's 3 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it is, or a game, they're all going to operate. Remember the goal without, and I've read your stuff, physiology better than I probably. The goal is to produce ATP. We're going to produce it with oxygen or without oxygen. And one of the toughest things I remember taking wrestling class in college is, and doing some grappling with the rugby players. The toughest thing is just that constant tension, right? That you have when it's painful. It's more painful than, and that. So how do we address that? Well, with a multifaceted approach, you're gonna do some absolute speed development work, which is low fatigue, very, very explosive. And on the other thing, and my feeling is you need to develop your technique in non-fatigue situations, and then gradually add a fatiguing environment so you have tough technique under fatigue, right? And there's a lot of ways to do that. I think a lot of that is related to sequencing your strength training, your power, whatever you want. I call it strength training because it's not just weight training, along with some of your metabolic work. See, again, I'm falling into the same trap of separating, but I know that I can do a 15-minute, what we call our GH workout, which is 30 seconds of high intensity work, 30 seconds recovery. We do 12 minutes of that, and you're going to lie on the mat. You're not going to be able to get up for 20 minutes. Okay. So there's a place for that. And I would sequence that type of work then with 10 minutes of steady state aerobic work rather than, and I read, somebody said, I won't say the name, this guy's a big martial arts conditioning guy, and he advocates, hour and a half runs. And I'm thinking, man, you're training people to be slow. So start with bouts of work, like, stuff like 15-second easy, 15-second medium, 15-second sprint, and build up to 20 minutes of that. And you can do that if you want on the bike. You can do it. If you live someplace where you can cross country ski, you run, things like that. So this idea of, I think training the energy systems has misled us to think that, we got that box ticked. Now we got anaerobic alactate. No, it all works together. Do we need to raise max VO2? That's the other one. And again, I'm talking, I said, I don't know about, I've been a close observer. Well, yeah, yes and no, but, anaerobic threshold, there's a lot of other factors that come into that. And you're going to raise max VO2. I ran into this with, quite a few years ago when I was working with Canadian basketball, and they were obsessed with getting the players up, their max VO2 up. Have you ever seen a 7-foot, 230-pound guy go out and try to run for an hour? It's ugly. I don't need it. And it's recorded on a seismograph, not a stopwatch. And he had a low max VO2, so his capacity was very low, right? So we devised a routine where he did 3 different types of aerobic activity. He started low impact. The highest impact first. So he ran for 5 minutes, then he got on the bike for 5 minutes, and he did slide board for 5 minutes. And then he gradually increased the amount of time and the intensity of that. He raised his max VO2 almost 10 L per kgs. So you should when you're 48, but and you're 22 years old, and stop smoking too, and that too helps. But so I don't know if that answers the question, but this is a fun thing to talk about because it again it's making better use of your training time and making it fit to that athlete's abilities and capacities. Okay. I think that's what we have to do. Everything is dictated in your case by the rules of the game, so to speak, the time limits and that kind of stuff. But, and I know, and in boxing again, that's always been of interest to me because one time I had a great cross country team at Cal and the Olympic Training Center was at Squaw Valley then. It was 1979. And the U.S. Boxing team was there, and they had, and so we'd go watch them spar, and then the guys would sit around the pool with the girls and stuff, and they'd say, "I can't, we can beat you." They would go an hour in the morning, and it was at altitude at 7,000 feet, and we'd go a half hour, and and catch up, seeing at the end, and we had these discussions. I had this long discussion with the coach. Like, why are you doing that? Basically there you're training for 3 rounds, right? In Olympic boxing, you're not training for 15.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you be better off doing interval training, more 10 med ball throws, a sprint, 10 med ball throws, a sprint. I think it affords, I'm sorry, I'm just running off at the mouth here, but
no,
it affords the opportunity for a lot of innovation in terms of how you prepare to be more match-like, more game-like.
No, I think a lot of the sweet arts of fighting coaches I've got on board will listen to that as music to their ears. I know a few of them are very, I guess you could say, against that whole idea of the old energy system, I guess, focus. I think a lot of it is just more kind of labeling to make it almost easier to categorize different interventions as well.
It sounds scientific, it's like, and a lot of, we can measure just about anything now, but is it meaningful? That's the question I always ask. Is it meaningful? And secondly, are you going to use that to determine what you do or inform what you do? This guy today is really interesting. I can say this on this podcast. The podcast was sponsored by Whoop, and he basically blew Whoop out of the water because Whoop puts a big thing on HRV, and he said HRV makes up 2% of our what we look at. And I have a good friend, Dr. Michael Joyner at Mayo Clinic, who's a world-renowned exercise physiologist, and he go like HRV, that's a clinical measure that we use in the hospital, in the cardiac unit. You can't measure it with a band or a thing on your finger, accurately. And even if you could measure it accurately, what does it really have to do as a measure of recovery? And this guy said, and I believe, and everybody I know in this, over my 50 plus years of coaching you've got to establish a relationship with the athlete, and they've got to be honest with you. If I say, James, how do you feel today? And you say, I'm just absolutely knackered, man. Yesterday's workout, you said it was a medium workout. It just kicked my ass. Well, I better be smart enough to adjust today's workout, or I'm going to bury you. And I think sometimes that's looked upon as, oh, you're not going to be mentally tough. No, I want you to be mentally tough in the, so sorry, I got on a soapbox again.
These tangents are perfect. That's exactly why I like doing this, because we can go down any road. But I'm with you there as well. I mean, I remember, I'll collect wellness data for my guys, and you'll see something that looks a little funny, and you'll talk to them, and maybe in the morning, if I was tracking HRV, maybe it would be bad in the morning, but then by the afternoon, after they've done a little bit of stuff in the morning, they're good and they have a good session. And if you went just by the data and not talking to them, you'll be like, okay, you're not doing anything today, And
right.
There's so much variation that can happen. That's interesting about the HRV data. I've heard that from a couple of different people about HRV, but may not potentially be, I guess, the monitoring tool that should be used as it is at the moment, just because, I mean, it's only 1 point in the day too, right?
Well, that, and remember, and we could take anything. You could look at, lactate. You could look at, if you want to take biopsies, if you're not much of a nut job, you want to take biopsies once a week or something like that. We're looking at one isolated physiological component, and the body is a system, and all these systems have to self-organize and work together. So to just look at that one measure is going to distort. It's going to be distorted. I think that's the way to say it. Yeah. I'd really, I can, while we're talking, it was this guy is really interesting, not because he confirmed my bias, because I was expecting him to say that this is really important, and we, and I almost stumbled when I was on my walk, so.
No, it's definitely an interesting point with the HRV, but I wanted to come back a little bit to the energy system stuff too. Like,
okay,
obvious when we're looking at, when people are talking about, okay, we want to target or prioritize the aerobic energy system because we're after these certain adaptations and we want to improve this, and this, or we're looking more anaerobic or higher intensity stuff within these parameters because I want to develop capacity or power, or what people will say is, lactate tolerance, or whatever the buzzword is around those different things, or zone 2 for the low end. How do we know, or how would someone know, I guess, what to do in a session when, I don't know if I'm framing this question correctly, but for example, if someone goes, okay, I'm going to do aerobic work, low intensity aerobic work, steady state, because I know, generally I'm probably going to get these adaptations, but if I'm going down the road, okay, 15, as you mentioned, 15 seconds jogging, 15 seconds a little harder, then 15 seconds even harder, and then repeat. How would you go about designing something like that? And how would you know what to put in that session versus something really easy to prescribe? Like, hey, this is kind of like the guidelines for aerobic capacity, aerobic power, and I can throw that in there versus being able to mix something up like that. I don't know if that question even made sense. I was trying.
No, it makes sense. It's the ongoing conundrum that you have in your disciplines in combat sports. It's an ongoing conundrum you have in team sports, and that too. So at what point do I get diminishing? The way I look at it maybe negatively in a sense. At what point am I getting diminishing returns by doing too much steady state aerobic work? That's what I have to look at. And so I would classify that type of work more as recovery regeneration type of work, capitalization, something like that. Yeah. And I would really look carefully at the mode that I'm using to achieve that. So it's where I sequence it, so, and I could be criticized by this, but if you're going to do a really, if say you're going to do a technical session and then you're going to fight, you're going to grapple for 15 minutes or something like that, then I would do right after that, I would do a really high intensity interval type of session. Yeah. Okay. With a lot of up down med ball throws, short sprints, easy jumps, that kind of stuff for 3-minute bouts. Okay. With 3 minutes recovery. And then I would end up with 15 to 20 minutes of steady aerobic work after that. So, and I think that's James, that's a mistake. Somewhere along the way, we've been taught that you can't. don't mix energy systems. Well, how do you mix energy systems?
That's huge. I fall into that trap too.
Yeah. Oh no. And I'm going. This doesn't make sense. I'm going to get. And if you're doing 2 sessions a day, look at how you're making those two are interacting. Too. So. My attitude toward the conditioning part, or toward all of that, is I always got to live to fight again. I think there's too much either beat the crap out of them,
for sure.
And you're working in tough disciplines. I understand, but you've worked in rugby too, and rugby league, you worked in union, but rugby league is...
I worked in both.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Rugby league is a brutal sport. I'll stand that up. It's tougher, 20 times tougher than American football. And
Yeah.
I spent in 2020 with Lachlan Penfold and the Melbourne Storm. I was down there for a week, and I've known Lachlan for 30 years. And I'm telling you what, this is the methodology. It starts out with speed. They go to technique. They go to and then they go to tackling, live tackling, and that.
Yep.
And then they'll do conditioning types of really high intensity games, and then some lower intensity stuff. And recognize that they're going to have to come back. Usually their pattern is, well, not always, and this was off season. I mean, it was January, so they're going to have to come back and do another quality session tomorw, and then an easy session. So does that answer the question? I mean, okay.
I think especially the idea of almost, as you mentioned, like 3 by 3 minute hard rounds followed by 10 to 15 minutes, like easy, I guess say aerobic work. Like it's almost drilled out of coaches and athletes. I mean, myself included, I as I mentioned, I fall into that trap too, where, hey, I'm doing pure aerobic work, I'm doing pure anaerobic, whatever work. I can't do the other energy system stuff because they interfere, and I don't want to interfere with their adaptations. But then when you think about what you're doing in the gym, you're starting with power stuff, then you might be doing some max strength stuff, then you might be doing some hypertrophy stuff, whatever, and you've got an interplay there, and that's seen as fine and all good. But when it comes to conditioning, it's like it's a no-no.
Yeah, and again, you may have a question on this too, and I have a question for you, like in the various combat sports. Now, a lot of them are their weight classifications, but the role that extensive use of maximal strength plays, to me, I've seen some programs and I go, this doesn't make sense. Do a block of intensive maximal strength work, and then you do more power endurance, more strength endurance, to support what you're doing. And the idea is the maximal strength will pull that other work up, but I don't think you have to do it to the extent that we've done it. A lot of sports too. And that's true.
Yeah, because that's really like a pure block periodization approach, right? That you're mentioning there.
Yeah.
I've never been a fan of pure block, especially in sports like combat and rugby and things, because it's, as you mentioned, you got to touch on your major and minor emphasis. You got to touch on everything because you need everything. You need everything, and when you just go down the one road, you stop touching on everything else, and you got to come back to it eventually at some point. And it makes things a little more difficult that way.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's this whole thing. I mean, you've heard me say this: simplicity yields complexity, and I think if you take a step back and recognize that we're not biomachines, we are living, breathing human beings that all bring different elements and different capacities to our sport, and what we have to do is then we have to fit our capacities to the sport, and it's a constant process of exploration. I mean, like right now, I'm working with a really high level group of swimmers, but some of they're still teenagers. I've worked with some of these kids now for 5 years, so you start to know the ins and outs of the person. Always coach the person first, not the sport. So some people, I abhor the term. I think I abhor the term grinding, but some people thrive because grinders don't last. In any sport, but some people need that kind of mentality. They need something. So you have to feed their fantasies a little bit, in different ways. I was telling the other day, there was a famous Australian swimmer who held the world record in the 1500, and for his whole career, he did the same workout every Monday, the same workout every Tuesday. that's by definition grinding. I mean, either that or he had a capacity to just turn his brain off, but I think that in looking at the sports that you're working in, the various combat sports, there's so much different, varied demands placed upon you that there's innumerable ways to get better, is the way I look at it. So it's pretty cool.
How do you, I guess, feed someone's fantasy if someone's listening to this and they love that grind mentality, but also need to be smart about their training? What are you doing then to kind of feed that?
Something every workout at a strategic place in the workout, because what's coming, where you leave them like where, they're laying on the mat for do something in about, I'm not arbitrarily picking this time frame, something between 2 and 3 minutes that really nails them, and then get going and then they're the ones that really want that hard. So, but as the coach, the sequence, so where you can place them, and it's a mind game, and that's one of it's a hard one, but that's what you have to do.
For sure. And I know
a lot of extra stuff after and things like that.
Yeah. I know you've talked about kind of a rhythm in sport, and it's something I've thought about for a while. I just started trying to write an article for Hammer Media on rhythm in sport, and I think I've only done not too much on it. And because to me, it's like in sport, rhythm is everything. Rhythm is about, sport is about disrupting your opponent's. In my head, sport is about disrupting your opponent's rhythm so you can impose your own rhythm in this sport. And that's why you see teams or athletes, they have the momentum or they have control of whatever's going on. It's because whatever's being done is being done at their rhythm, at their pace, and they're able to disrupt and stop their opponents doing whatever they want to do at their rhythm. But I know you've got various ideas on almost manipulating rhythm and change. I actually used some of your ideas when I was working with Romania Sevens. I had I would do various walking games, but I ended up changing the game where they had to walk like they were at waist high mud. So they had to walk around with their legs, just stuff like that where it changed in rhythm. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on the idea of rhythm and manipulating rhythm and training.
Well, I'm going to sound pretty airy-fairy and like a 60s hippie here, but which I sort of was anyway. I was in California. I discovered the Grateful Dead, though, a year ago instead of 50 years ago. But, okay, look, we have a fundamental rhythm in our body, and it's called our heartbeat. And I my 2-year-old granddaughter was here and I was holding her, and she, when she gets tired, she puts her head right on her mom or dad's heart or on her heart. And I thought, that got me thinking about that again. So there's your fundamental rhythm. And you're right. I like your definition that you're trying to disrupt somebody else's rhythm. And the biggest thing that we have to do in sports like you're working with now and in rugby and that is asynchronous, being able to go 1, 2, 2, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1, like that. And I always tell people that we had this discussion yesterday morning at our special core work session about it's a big dance. It's just a big dance, and it's and I love music. I can't carry a tune in a basket, but I love music. So it's sometimes it's a well orchestrated symphony, right? Katas, it's just and there's a certain tempo or like I even use Tai Chi tempo. We'll do stuff at Tai Chi tempo, okay, and then you speed it up, and then you slow it down, and that. So I think as a coach, being conscious of it, and figuring out opportunities to change tempos and teach rhythm and tempo is a real good opportunity to get people better. You can do your warm-up exercise in a rhythmic manner, and then you can and then you can do something as simple as close your eyes, and now you have to tune in. Now, what is that? Can you still keep the same kind of footfall, stuff like that. So I it's there. I don't think we've explored it enough, James. Certain sports have, but I kind of the macho kind of sports, American football and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I just look at the opportunities, and I think, I said this 25 years ago when I first went to Australia. Rugby was ahead of the game in a lot of things like that.
Yeah.
You heard Jimmy Radcliffe talk at Gain, and when Chip Kelly was at Oregon, and that's basically Eddie Jones. Well, he's fired and he's back in Australia, but when he went in, Jimmy was over there. He took those concepts. Dean took the concepts back to the Storm, and then Lachlan, where we've just got to operate. Now you can operate faster and be inefficient. And so the qualifying term is rhythm, is the rhythm and tempo that you can control, and dial it up and dial it down, and do that. So it's a fascinating concept. It's certainly not new, but we could explore it and use it a lot more, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, a couple of previous podcast guests, Gary Turner and John Mackey, have talked a little bit about manipulating sparring with rhythm. I know Gary talks about sometimes he'll do super slow sparring. So you can only move very slowly. And that means you have to, essentially you can see everything as well, but it's just manipulating the tempo of things there as well. So there's lots of interesting concepts and things.
To me, that would be ungodly hard, as I visualize. Ungodly
exactly.
Hard. We used to do that. I did it with a discus where it was Tai Chi rhythm. They'd have to do 2 Tai Chi throws and then full speed throw. And they're just freak out. There'd just be smoke coming out of their ears, because they want to go. No, because you're it's possible to be too fast, James. It's possible to be too fast. And I'm sure you've seen that in fighting where somebody's just, hell bent for leather and they're out of control, and oh man, that would be really tough.
Exactly. And I know you mentioned as well, American football. I mean, some of the training you see in American football makes me shed a tear that you see online. You're like, damn. And these people are getting paid how much money? But
the conditioning coaches are getting paid $1 million and
crazy.
You're stealing, but whatever. I wouldn't trade places with him for $1 million either because, I don't know. I might consider it, but it's because the culture of the game is just not. It won't embrace newer training methodologies. And that's what I've seen.
I mean, combat sports is pretty similar in that regard, but it's changing, I think, now with the UFC Performance Institute bringing some more information to light and kind of making it a little more mainstream with some proper training methods. But man, it's still rampant, the endless fight-specific circuits till you puke and just random things placed anywhere.
And monkey see, monkey do. I'm sure everybody tries to find out what the champion does, and then whatever he or she does, then they copy it.
Exactly.
And I've fallen victim to that at various times. And certainly I want to know. I'm fascinated by the Norwegian hurdler who shattered the world record in the 400 hurdles. I was supposed to go to Norway in the end of April, and I can't go now because we've got world champs trials. But I want to know, because is there things that some of it is, and this is when you look at things, people's training, a lot of it is looking at what aren't they doing that everybody else is do. It's like they might do some crazy drill or some crazy workout. Everybody focuses on that, but what aren't they doing? What are they not doing that everybody else is doing too? And that's kind of become my thing now, looking at it that way. That's another way to learn.
That's a really good thing to look at. I've never actually thought about it that way. Maybe I'll have to see that next time I check something like that out.
Look at, I was doing this with Chris Webb, who's in charge of Gain Swimming, and I said, Chris, we need to have couple of independent people, not swimming coaches or that don't know swimming, to look at our programs right now and see what's there and see what isn't there from their point of view. I think that as coaches, as teachers, as learners, that's a really, really important, mechanism. So an independent sort of review, and you can do it yourself. I was doing some of that this morning, looking through some stuff, but you just like anything, right? You fall in love with certain things. There's certain things that my head coach that I'm working with now said to me the other day. He said, well, why do you always I've been working with them for 10 years now. He said, why do you always put this on this particular day? Mm-hmm. Silence. And I said, Brent, it's a really good question. I don't have an answer for you. I've just always done it that way. Well, that's a crappy answer if you think of it. Yeah. Well, it works. Well, baloney. If I moved it to another day, would it work better? We don't know, So I'm my own roughest critic, but you have to be, right? You have to be. Mm-hmm. So anyway.
Yeah. No, for sure. Vern, I think I've pretty much asked you everything I had on my list here, but if anyone wants to find you and follow you and see, and I guess follow your Facebook rants and tweets and everything else, where can they do that?
Well, I'm on Facebook. Twitter is at Coach Gambetta. I haven't gotten kicked off yet. LinkedIn, I get kicked off Twitter. LinkedIn is a lot more professional anyway. Just look up my name, Vern Gambetta. Email is gstscoach@gmail.com. And the website that you should go to is the Gain, GAIN, and then another N, network.com. Find out about Gain Network. We have coffee talks once a month that are open to anybody. We haven't had very many combat people to Gain, and I think it would be you'd really enjoy it, and you can mention it. I mean, it's a really special experience, and it's a network, and we've got just some of the. We started in 2007. I just realized that the other day. So, wow. So yeah, that's mainly where. And if you're in Sarasota and you don't want to buy, I don't drink coffee, but you can buy me an iced tea, and I'll sit down and talk. So I love sharing ideas with people. You always learn stuff. So that'd be great.
Perfect. Thanks for coming on, Vern, as well. I really appreciate it.
Oh, good. I'm glad we were able to go through the confusion and get on. So it's very good. Thank you.
Awesome.